G'day folks, it's Will here and welcome to Flow Mountain Bike. Now it was back in 2020 when we last reviewed a Cube Stereo Hybrid 160, and with its powerful Bosch motor, easy handling and cushy ride quality, it was certainly an appealing package for the money. It wasn't perfect though. We were less than impressed with the narrow bars and the tyre spec, which was compounded by the twitchy handling and the wallowy rear suspension. It appears that Cube has been listening, however, because this new version addresses every criticism we had of the old model whilst bringing about a couple of other key improvements. But is it enough to take on the best e-mountain bikes on the market? We've been testing this bike for the past few weeks to find out. So the Cube Stereo Hybrid 160 is the German brand's biggest travel e-mountain bike. It's got 160mm of rear travel, a 170mm travel fork and dual 27.5-inch wheels. Now its wheel size does make it stand out amongst some of its competitors, most of which have moved to a full 29-inch setup or a mullet setup. Of course, there are still folks out there who prefer the ride quality of 27.5-inch wheels, and typically they do offer greater strength and overall stiffness compared to 29-inch wheels, which is an important consideration for a hard-hitting e-mountain bike. Indeed, Cube is clearly committed to the platform, with the Stereo Hybrid 160 receiving an all-new chassis for this year. The carbon mainframe has been stretched out, and it now accommodates a bigger 750 watt-hour battery inside the down tube. You'll find a Bosch Performance CX Gen 4 motor, as well as the latest Kiox 300 display and LED controller up at the cockpit. There have also been some geometry updates for the new Stereo Hybrid 160. The head angle does remain the same at 65 degrees, but the reach measurement has increased by up to 25mm depending on the frame size. On the medium that we've been testing here, the reach is 453mm. The seat angle has also steepened by a degree, that's now at 76 degrees, while the rear centre remains nice and short at 441mm. One important note on sizing is that the new Stereo Hybrid 160 frame is only available in 3 sizes. That's medium, large and extra large. There are no smalls available in the new generation frame, and I suspect that's due to the difficulties of fitting the bigger battery inside the down tube. For shorter riders, Cube does offer the entry-level model in a small size, though it does use the older generation frame with a smaller 625 watt-hour battery. The prices start at 7,699 Australian dollars for that entry-level model, and they go all the way up to 14,999 Australian dollars for the top-end model. The bike that we've been testing here sits one step down from the top. This is the Cube Stereo Hybrid 160 HPC Action Team model, and the price on this one is 11.5 grand. Now it's worth noting that in Australia, the importer and retailer for Cube, which is called 99 Bikes, they offer a $5 club membership, and that instantly brings the price down to 10,350 Australian dollars, which is very impressive given the spec. On this bike, we've got Fox Factory Series 38 fork, a Flowdeck shock, and a transfer dropper post. There's a Shimano XT group set and high-quality alloy wheels from Newman, with 2.4-inch Schwalbe tyres with a Magic Mary on the front and a Big Betty on the rear. Confirmed weight on our test bike is 24.78 kilos, though I will point out here that we usually weigh our test bikes with the wheels set up tubeless. Unfortunately though, this bike comes with regular rim tape fitted, which means you'll need to buy tubeless tape, valves and sealant if you want to set up the wheels tubeless, which is kind of disappointing for a high-end bike in this day and age. Within the first few hundred metres on the trail, it's abundantly clear that the new Stereo Hybrid 160 is a significant improvement over its predecessor. The fit is much better thanks to the wider bars, the longer reach and that steeper seat tube angle, which helps to place you more centrally within the bike. The suspension is beautifully plush and well controlled by the Fox Flowdeck shock. You're treated to oodles of traction and rock-devouring sensitivity, which helps to keep the whole bike calm and comfortable over rocky trails. Grip levels are no doubt bolstered by the impeccable tyre spec. The Magic Mary and Big Betty is a fantastic combination, especially when paired with the Addex soft rubber compound. We also love that Cube has spec'd an extra tough super gravity casing for the rear tyre, which typically cops an absolute hiding on the back of an e-mountain bike. The result is a fantastic level of damping, and despite us running low pressures with those inner tubes, we encountered no punctures at all throughout testing, which is very impressive. Also improved over the previous generation frame, Cube has made the rear suspension more progressive. The result is better big hit control, and combined with the Floadex Shock's generous bottom out bumper, hitting full travel is basically a non-event on this bike. Mid-stroke support has also improved, and overall it's quite poppy and enthusiastic for a big travel e-mountain bike. Despite weighing close to 25 kilos, it's actually pretty easy to throw around. This was particularly obvious to me having come off the Scott Patron, which is a 29er with a much longer wheelbase, and as a result has a very grounded ride quality. In comparison, the Stereo Hybrid 160 feels smaller, more agile and easier to place on the trail. Of course, the 27.5-inch wheels contribute to this sensation, and so too do the short chainstays. There's less effort required to pick up the front wheel, and the balance point comes much sooner, making this an absolute manual machine. It also loves to take to the air, with the progressive suspension and the sturdy tyre casings helping to soak up heavy landings. All of this makes the Stereo Hybrid 160 a load of fun to ride on gravity-fueled flow trails where you can make the most of its agile character. On the flip side, it also makes it easy to ride at slower speeds on less hectic terrain. Indeed, newer riders will find confidence in the unobtrusive steering, the plush suspension, and the comfortable riding position. As for what we didn't like about the Cube Stereo Hybrid 160, while the Fox 38 is a terrific fork, the Fit 4 damper seems like an odd choice. There is little need for a lockout on the front of an e-mountain bike, and the Fit 4 damper just doesn't provide the same control and sensitivity as the superior Grip 2 damper. As a result, there was more feedback coming up through my hands than compared to my feet. With that in mind, we'd much rather see this bike come with a Grip 2 damper to improve the overall balance. Along with the 27.5-inch wheels and the relatively conservative geometry, the Stereo Hybrid 160 doesn't feel as plowable as some other bikes in this category. It certainly requires more concentration on the descents, especially compared to a full 29er like the Norco Sight VLT. This is also the case when comparing it to mullet bikes like the Merida E160 and the Canyon Spectral On. Although the Stereo Hybrid 160 does have a slacker head angle, that smaller front wheel does make the front end steering feel a little bit lighter and less planted in most circumstances. I wouldn't necessarily call it twitchy though, and indeed the overall weight, the plush suspension and the sticky tyres mean there's a load of inherent stability in this bike despite the smaller 27.5-inch wheels. Still, I can't help but wonder how this bike would perform as a dedicated mullet bike. Perhaps it would sacrifice some of its nimbleness, but it would surely boost control and confidence over rough terrain, which are important attributes for an e-enduro race bike. There were some other issues we encountered with this bike throughout testing. During the first ride, there was a loud knocking noise when I was bouncing down a descent, which turned out to be the headset. The plastic top cap had a small split around the bolt hole, and that meant it wasn't preloading the bearings properly. I replaced it with an alloy top cap, snugged up the bearings, and it's been tight, quiet, and smooth ever since. Unfortunately, there is still some creaking coming from where the cables pass through the headset. It's not the end of the world, but I'm just not a fan of this routing method being used on a mountain bike that's going to be ridden in all sorts of mucky conditions. The cheap plastic chain guide doesn't seem to want to stay in position, and while there is plenty of frame armouring on this bike, the fit is somewhat sloppy between the motor casing and the down tube protector. The wiring for the rear speed sensor is kinda messy, and I'm a bit worried about the vulnerability of the Kiox display and the LED controller in the event of a crash. The way they sit above the handlebar also means you can't flip this bike upside down on the side of the trail, say if you needed to repair a puncture, which is kind of annoying. So while the Bosch user interface is totally functional, it's nowhere near as refined as something like the Specialized Levo. Otherwise, there's a lot to like about the Cube Stereo Hybrid 160. The spec is basically unrivaled at this price point, and thanks to the powerful Bosch motor and that big 750 watt-hour battery, you can get a ton of riding out of this thing. If you'd like to know more about the range testing and also how the Cube compares to some of the other e-mountain bikes we've been testing lately, then make sure you click that link in the video description below to check out the full review of this bike right here. There's a bit more info in there about sizing and suspension setup, so make sure you check it out over at flowmountainbike.com. If you do have any questions for us about the Cube, then make sure you drop those into the comments below. Otherwise, we hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time. Tooroo!